From the shadows of the medieval world came books not meant for ordinary eyes. Bound in weathered leather, their ink darkened by time and secrecy, these manuscripts whispered of truths forbidden by both kings and the church. To read them was not merely an act of curiosity, it was a gamble with one's soul. Among these works, one name surfaces again and again in hushed tones: the Black Book. Its reputation was never built on open libraries or public archives, but on rumors carried across monasteries, whispered between trembling monks who feared its pages more than the devil himself. The medieval world believed that words were not just symbols, they were spells. To write something down was to bind it, and to read aloud was to release it. A book of sacred scripture could bless, but a book of forbidden rites could unleash horrors beyond the human mind. The Black Book was said to contain incantations so potent that to pronounce them was to summon forces neither angelic nor demonic, but something far older, something that existed before the first cathedral stone was ever laid. Legends insist that even the church itself once sought to erase its presence. Scribes were ordered to burn certain manuscripts, yet some volumes escaped, tucked away by those who believed that destruction of knowledge was a greater sin than possession of it. Monasteries became vaults, holding secrets under lock and chain, while whispers spread of monks who lost their sanity after only a glance at the forbidden script. The Black Book was not alone in its infamy. Across Europe, other texts carved a place in history's darker corners. The Codex Gigas, often called the Devil's Bible, carried illustrations so monstrous that many believed it had been written in a single night by a monk who bargained his soul. The grimoires of necromancy, from the Clavicula Salomonis to the Grand Grimoire, promised power over spirits, fortune, and death itself. But where those books still exist, locked in rare collections, the Black Book remains elusive, a ghost of literature, always rumored, never confirmed. Stories placed it everywhere and nowhere. In Iceland, Tales of the Galdrabach described a grimoire that merged pagan runes with Christian prayers, believed to bend reality itself. In Eastern Europe, whispers claimed the Black Book was hidden beneath a monastery floor, sealed with wax and iron so that no man might hear the voices bound inside. In Italy, secret orders were rumored to have possessed fragments of the manuscript, using its knowledge in rituals that blurred the line between devotion and heresy. But what terrified medieval minds was not only the content of the book, it was the belief that the book itself was alive, that its words shifted when read, that no two eyes ever saw the same page twice, that it was less a manuscript and more a mirror, reflecting the reader's own fears, desires, and sins. Priests wrote in their journals of novices who fell to madness after handling it, trembling as if they had heard a voice calling from between the margins. Fear of the written word was not paranoia, it was power. Knowledge in those days was not free. It was controlled, rationed, guarded. Books were copied by hand, each one precious. To possess a book meant wealth. To possess a forbidden one meant danger. The very act of reading carried weight, for not everyone was allowed to read. The mystery of the Black Book was magnified by this scarcity. Making it more than just a text, it became a legend that defined what it meant for knowledge to be dangerous. As centuries passed, stories of this cursed manuscript grew. Sailors spoke of captains who carried it across seas, believing its charms could bend the winds. Soldiers swore that its prayers made men invulnerable on the battlefield, only to see those same men die screaming in nightmares. In rural villages, it was said that wise women, accused of witchcraft, drew their power from stolen pages of the forbidden script. Every tale reinforced the idea that the Black Book was never meant to be read, only feared. The Church's silence only deepened the mystery. For every heretical text publicly denounced, there were others quietly locked away in secret archives. The Vatican, with its vast vaults of hidden manuscripts, became a symbol of what was concealed. If a book could summon demons, command angels, or alter fate itself? Where better to hide it than in the very heart of Christendom, buried beneath the city of God? Yet, history leaves us with fragments, not certainty. A reference in a monk's diary, a line in a forbidden's index, a marginal note in a burned manuscript. These scraps suggest the Black Book may have been real, or perhaps it was never a single volume, but rather a legend woven from many forbidden texts. A shadow cast by fear and imagination, magnified until it became a monster of its own. Still, the allure lingers. The idea that somewhere, in some forgotten vault, rests a manuscript that should never be opened. A book that does not just describe the forbiddens, but embodies it. A book that even now, centuries later, still whispers in the imagination of those who dare to wonder what secrets it contains. The Black Book remains untouchable, untamed, and perhaps unfindable. Yet its legend sets the stage for something greater. Because to understand its place in history is to see that the world has always feared what it could not control: knowledge that defied order, words that promised power. And in that fear, we glimpse a truth. The most terrifying mysteries are not those we can see, but those that remain hidden in the shadows of the page. In the heart of the medieval world, knowledge was not simply written, it was carved into existence, often with the sacrifice of life itself. To hold a grimoire in your hands was to hold the skin of the innocent, the blood of beasts, and the whispered breath of the scribe who dared to craft it. These were not mere books. They were vessels of living terror. Every grimoire began with flesh. Vellum, the favored medium, was not made from ordinary parchment, but from the hides of young calves. The younger the animal, the smoother and whiter the surface. Monks and scribes stretched the skins across wooden frames, scraping away every trace of hair and blood, until only a ghostly sheet remained. A blank canvas for mysteries. A page both silent and screaming. Each book demanded dozens of such skins. To write one volume, entire herds were slaughtered. Every spell, every symbol inked on its surface, carried with it the weight of sacrifice. But the vellum was only the beginning. Ink itself was crafted with obsessive care, as if the words needed to be written in blood to come alive. And sometimes they were. Recipes survive of ink made from gallnuts and soot mixed with wine or vinegar. Yet in the margins of these recipes are darker additions, iron filings steeped in animal blood, or even human fluids whispered of in forbidden circles. To write a spell in ordinary ink was to risk emptiness. To write it in blood was to give it breath. Many believed the blood linked the book directly to its scribe, binding their life force to the page. To read it aloud was to awaken that link, summoning not just words, but the soul imprinted into them. Scribes worked in silence, often alone, their workshops filled with the stench of skin and the metallic tang of iron ink. They drew not only letters, but symbols, shapes that carried meaning beyond words. In the curling loops of a letter G, a demon's tail might hide. In the flourish of a capital A, the open eye of an angel might peer. Margins were never blank. They were thresholds. Snakes, dragons, or sacred sigils crept along the edges, turning the act of reading into a crossing into another world. The act of writing was not without danger. It was said that a grimoire could absorb the essence of the one who created it. To copy a spell was to risk binding yourself to it. The belief was not metaphorical. Some scribes swore that the parchment grew heavier with each page completed, as if the book itself was feeding. There are tales of men who, after completing such manuscripts, wasted away, pale, gaunt, and hollow-eyed, as though the ink had stolen their vitality. Their books, meanwhile, seemed to thrum with a pulse of their own. Not all grimoires were written by monks or scholars. Alchemists, occultists, and those on the fringes of faith sought to craft their own texts, blending scripture with sorcery. They copied the prayers of the church and inverted them, stitching curses where blessings once lay. They mixed invocations to saints with invocations to spirits until the boundary between heaven and hell blurred. These books were not only guides, they were weapons. One could heal with a prayer on one page and curse an enemy to madness with the spell on the next. The construction of these volumes was an act of obsession. Some were locked with chains, their covers bound in iron to keep their secrets from escaping. Others bore seals of wax or lead, stamped with esoteric emblems that only the initiated could understand. The bravest, or perhaps the most reckless, bound them in skin. Human skin, in rare but whispered cases. Such books were said to breathe, the pores of the leather still faintly visible, as though the body itself resisted its second life. The most dangerous part was never reading the grimoire. It was writing it. Every letter was a ritual. Every stroke of ink a pact. For those who believed, writing a spell was not simply preserving knowledge. It was enacting it. To inscribe a curse was to perform it, even if no words were yet spoken. To copy a summoning was to invite the summoned to linger. This is why many grimoires remained unfinished, their final pages blank. Perhaps the scribe could not continue, or perhaps they dared not. The whispers of the medieval world claimed that books could kill. A cursed manuscript might bring fever or madness to anyone who opened it. Some grimoires were said to drive their creators insane before they even finished binding the last page. The Church itself understood the power of words, which is why its priests guarded the Bible so jealously. If Holy Scripture could save a soul, then the reversed scripture of a grimoire could just as easily damn one. And yet, despite the danger, grimoires multiplied. They were traded in secret, hidden in libraries, buried with their authors. Each one unique, each one a mirror of the hands that created it. And with each, the line blurred further between faith and heresy, devotion and destruction. The birth of the grimoire was never an accident. It was always an act of intent, carved in flesh, sealed in ink, and bound with the soul of its maker. These were not books to be read lightly. They were relics of obsession, testaments to the hunger for forbidden knowledge. And in the quiet of candlelit rooms, when a scribe lifted his quill to the pale skin stretched before him, he knew. Every word written was a word surrendered. Every symbol inked was a piece of himself gone forever. The Black Book was not merely ink upon parchment. It was a vessel, a doorway to forces that lingered between heaven and hell. Within its worn and shadowed pages lay incantations that promised both light and darkness, salvation and damnation. Medieval magicians, cloaked in secrecy, whispered of its dual nature. To them, the book was neither purely holy nor entirely damned, but a paradox capable of summoning angels of divine radiance or demons of unspeakable malice. The pact was always the same, a bargain written in trembling hands, sealed in candle smoke and silence. To call upon a demon was to invite ruin, yet to beckon an angel carried its own dangers. Power was never given freely. Each ritual demanded a price, and the book's readers believed that price was often carved into the soul itself. Rituals were not simple recitations. They were ceremonies conducted at forbidden hours, beneath moons that glowed like burning silver, or at crossroads where the earth's veins were said to intersect with the unseen. The practitioner would draw circles upon the ground, inscribed with protective symbols stolen from both scripture and sorcery. Within those boundaries, they would place offerings in scents that stung the eyes, blood from animals or from their own trembling fingers, relics of saints stolen from churches. Each element was believed to thin the veil between the mortal world and the realms beyond. The summoning of angels was far from the soft imagery of divine guardians depicted in stained glass windows. To medieval magicians, angels were immense beings of fire and terror, their voices capable of shattering sanity. The rituals to summon them required purity of intent, long fasts, and endless prayer, followed by chants inscribed in the Black Book. Those who succeeded described visions of beings with countless wings, eyes that pierced through the flesh into the marrow, and a light so unbearable it was said to leave men blind for the rest of their lives. Yet the angel's blessings were coveted protection in battle, knowledge of hidden treasures, and whispers of divine secrets that could sway kings and topple empires. But the darker rituals promised even more. For those who risked invoking demons, the process was far more perilous. The book instructed that a pact must be written in one's own blood, declaring loyalty in exchange for gifts of forbidden knowledge. At the strike of midnight, the invoker would light black candles and chant passages that twisted the Latin of holy texts into something grotesque. The demon's arrival was not subtle. It was accompanied by the stench of sulfur, the rattling of windows, and the suffocating sense of being watched by something ancient and cruel. Accounts from those who survived such attempts tell of bargains made for wealth, beauty, or vengeance. Some claimed to gain the ability to heal the sick or foretell the future, while others were given charms to sway the hearts of enemies or lovers. Yet the rewards never came without torment. A man who summoned an angel to reveal the location of hidden gold was said to lose his mind, wandering the forests in a fever until he starved. Another who bargained with a demon for strength was found years later, his body grotesquely twisted, his bones shattered from within, as though the very pact had devoured him. Perhaps the most terrifying aspect of these rituals was not the danger of summoning, but the silence that followed. The practitioner, once bound, was never truly alone again. Voices lingered in the dark corners of their mind, some gentle, others cruel, whispering promises or threats in the stillness of the night. This was the true price of the pact, not the fleeting rewards, but the eternal companionship of something no human was meant to know. Historians have debated whether these accounts were the fever dreams of madmen or genuine encounters with forces beyond comprehension. Yet the consistency of the stories is difficult to ignore. Across Europe, in dusty manuscripts and trial records of accused sorcerers, the same patterns appear. A crossroads, a circle of salt, the invocation of names both angelic and infernal. The moment of contact, followed inevitably by madness, ruin, or death. Whether real or imagined, the ritual was more than superstition. It was a doorway to humanity's deepest fears and desires. Even the Church, in its denunciations, admitted an uneasy truth, that many who dabbled in such rites truly believed they had touched something beyond themselves. Some priests whispered in private that angels could indeed be forced to appear, but at a cost so steep it bordered on blasphemy. Others claimed demons were far too eager to answer, luring men into contracts that damned them to eternal servitude. And yet, despite the danger, the allure of power was irresistible. The book's pages continued to be copied, passed in secret, hidden within monasteries or beneath floorboards, waiting for the next desperate soul to attempt a pact. There is a strange symmetry in this chapter of history. On one hand, mankind sought the light calling upon angels to heal, to protect, to grant divine insight. On the other, it embraced the abyss summoning demons to wound, to destroy, to claim what could not be earned. Both paths ended in ruin, reminding us that whether one sought the grace of heaven or the corruption of hell, the act of summoning itself was a trespass into realms forbidden. The Black Book did not merely describe these rituals, it became the ritual. It was the altar, the circle, the blood. Every word written was a spell, every name invoked a risk. And those who turned its pages in search of power would discover too late that the true pact was not with angels or demons, but with the book itself. Once opened, it was said, it could never truly be closed again. They say power is never given freely. In the medieval world, it was bought through whispers in the dark, traded in secret rooms, and written in ink that smelled of smoke and blood. The Devil's Bible, unlike any manuscript of its time, offered not merely words, but promises. Promises that tempted the desperate, the ambitious, and the vengeful alike. Among its most alluring pages were spells designed to change the course of one's life. To the impoverished, it whispered of overflowing granaries, of gold that multiplied, of merchants bound by invisible compacts to trade at your advantage. These incantations were framed as gifts of prosperity, yet always with a shadow attached. Wealth gained through the book was rumored to vanish as quickly as it came, leaving the seeker more destitute than before. Beyond the hunger for riches was the hunger of the heart. The book's love enchantments were said to bind affections, twist emotions, and plant desire where none had existed before. A knight longing for a noblewoman, a widow pining for lost tenderness, or even rulers seeking alliances through forced devotion. All were said to turn to the book's pages. The words were simple enough: chants, symbols, and offerings under moonlight. But the outcomes were seldom gentle. The affection gained this way was described as obsessive, consuming, even violent. What was promised as love often became chains. Then came the curses. These were the darkest seeds of all, meant for those who nursed hatred stronger than hope. Entire passages outlined how to write an enemy's name in ash and oil, how to carve symbols into wax figures, how to call upon unseen hands to torment and weaken rivals. Some chroniclers noted that these curses promised more than mere misfortune. They hinted at madness, illness, or the kind of despair that drove men to abandon their families and wander into the night. These pages gave the illusion of justice, but delivered destruction indiscriminately, often returning to consume the one who had summoned them. Still, for many, the most forbidden sections were not those of wealth or love or vengeance, but of command over death itself. Necromancy was not a casual suggestion in these pages. It was laid out as though it were an art, complete with instructions, symbols, and sacrifices. Raising the dead was not spoken of metaphorically, but literally, calling forth spirits from graves, coercing them into servitude, or demanding revelations from their restless forms. Whispers told of men who followed these rituals, only to find themselves haunted by more than they summoned. The dead did not obey easily. The more the living sought to control them, the more the veil between worlds thinned, letting through shadows that could not be banished. Entire villages once spoke of the restless ones, apparitions said to follow practitioners long after the rituals had ended, voices calling in the night, footsteps pacing behind them where no man stood. Most chilling of all were the passages that described not just summoning the dead, but raising entire hosts of shadow soldiers. These armies, bound by ink and incantation, were said to obey a master's will with the precision of a disciplined legion. Yet every tale of their calling ended in ruin. The shadows devoured not only the enemy, but the land itself. Livestock wasted, children sickened, crops rotted black. Victory was brief and ruin eternal. To hold this book was to hold both promise and peril. Each spell carried a price, and the cost was never hidden, only written in ways that most ignored. The gold gained demanded a soul's integrity. The love conjured demanded freedom. The curse invoked demanded peace of mind. And the voices of the dead, once called, never truly left. A devil's Bible was not a guide to mastering the world. It was a labyrinth, each path leading deeper into entanglement. Those who sought its gifts discovered too late that they were never recipients, only fuel. The wealth fed the book. The blood fed the book. The despair, the ruin, the sleepless nights, all of it fed the book. And so, the promises it carried were not false. They were traps precisely laid. Every spell that worked did so by tightening invisible chains around the practitioner, drawing them further into the book's grasp. It was a silent bargain, one that never needed to be signed. The very act of turning the page was enough to seal it. By the time one realized the weight of the gift, it was too late. The Devil's Bible was not a manual for power. It was the perfect snare, promising everything, and in the end, taking more than it ever gave. They whispered that certain books were not merely written with ink and parchment, but with the essence of the damned themselves. The legend of grimoires bound in human skin has persisted for centuries, feeding the imagination with equal parts terror and fascination. Among these tales, the so-called Black Book stands as a cursed artifact, said to have been sewn together from the flayed remains of sinners and heretics. Every crease of its leather was believed to echo with the agony of those whose flesh it once was, turning each page into a silent scream. This practice, known later by scholars as anthropodermic bibliopagy, was not entirely myth. Scattered across Europe and the Americas, museums and libraries hold unsettling relics confirmed by modern science to be wrapped in human hide. Not the works of witches or demons, but of physicians, executioners, and morbid collectors who treated the human body as both specimen and binding. Yet folklore never cared for the mundane truth. It embroidered these bindings with stories of cursed texts, of volumes that pulsed faintly under candlelight, as if the soul of the skin still lived within. The Black Book's legend grew out of this uneasy intersection of fact and fear. It was said to contain rituals so dark that even the church dared not publicly acknowledge its existence. According to whispers passed down through generations, its pages were stained not only with ink, but with the blood of sacrifices, each ritual inscribed during the stillness of a midnight hour. Possession of the book meant more than ownership of forbidden knowledge. It meant carrying the weight of souls pressed flat and silent within its cover. Accounts from the 17th century speak of a volume discovered in a monastery crypt, bound in leather, unlike that of any animal. The monks who found it described how the surface was warm to the touch, as if it held a faint ember beneath its skin. Those who dared open it reported a sense of being watched, their eyes drawn into lines of text that seemed to rearrange themselves when read aloud. Such tales cannot be proven, but they carried enough weight to inspire generations of fear. The psychological power of these rumors cannot be underestimated. To believe that words were written on the body of the dead was to collapse the distance between life, death, and the forbiddens. A book became no longer a passive object, but an active vessel, containing not only thoughts, but human essence. Superstition spread that those who read from such bindings risked fusing their own soul with the text, trapped forever within its pages when their body failed. Some real bindings even confirm parts of this belief, though stripped of their supernatural cloak. A few medical texts from the Enlightenment era were bound in the skin of executed criminals, offered up as a macabre symbol of justice. Others bore inscriptions like, Hic liber expellibus factus est, this book is made of skin. Such cold declarations bridged the realm between myth and reality, proof that the human body could indeed be turned into literature. The Black Book's legend took this one step further, suggesting that the binding was not punishment, but pact. In certain villages, whispers told of farmers who swore the book could not be destroyed. Thrown into fire, it smoldered but refused to burn. Submerged in water, it bobbed to the surface as if rejecting the baptism of purity. Always it returned, its cover slick as though sweating, its presence a constant reminder of the line between mortal and damned. For those who encountered it, fear was not just of what the book contained, but of what it represented. To hold it was to cradle mortality, to place hands on what should never have been touched. Even if the stories of screams woven into its cover were no more than folklore, the image was powerful enough to haunt the imagination. One could almost hear, when the night grew still, the faintest sigh from within the leather. Artifacts that truly exist today, like the binding of the Practicorum Questionum in Harvard's library, proven through peptide mass fingerprinting to be human skin, stand as chilling reminders that the line between history and horror is thinner than most dare admit. These are not the fantastical black books of legend, yet they validate the possibility that such bindings could have existed. And once possibility is admitted, imagination fills the void with shadow. The Black Book was no ordinary tome, even in story. It was said that if left unattended, it shifted slightly of its own accord, as though some invisible hand sought to turn its pages. Its legends claimed that only by tracing the sigils on its first page with one's own blood could the book be silenced. Failure to do so meant whispers that grew louder each night, until the reader's mind fractured under the pressure of voices demanding release. Whether these tales sprang from fear, from memory, or from the unsettling truth of anthropodermic bindings, they left behind an enduring mark. The very thought of a book wrapped in human flesh, carrying the weight of souls, is enough to unsettle the strongest mind. Myth or reality, its existence reshaped how people understood knowledge, not as mere text, but as something alive, breathing, and bound to the skin of mortality. And so the Black Book endured, both as a relic of whispered superstition and as a metaphor for the deepest human dread that our very bodies could be stripped, bound, and turned into vessels of forbidden's power. In every creak of its leather, in every shadow cast across its cover, people saw not just a book, but a prison of souls. A reminder that damnation could be pressed between covers and shelved like a secret waiting to be opened. When the shadow of the Inquisition spread across Europe, knowledge itself became dangerous. Books that whispered of the hidden arts, grimoires filled with incantations, invocations, and symbols were no longer objects of curiosity, but marks of guilt. To be found with such a book was to carry a death sentence bound in leather and ink. The Church had long feared the written word when it wandered outside sanctioned doctrine. A book could not be silenced as a man could. It could pass from hand to hand, from century to century, carrying secrets across borders and generations. And so the flames became a weapon not only against bodies, but against memory itself. Witch hunts rose from paranoia and power, fueled by sermons and whispered rumors. A single accusation could ignite an entire village. Men and women were dragged into courts, interrogated under the weight of superstition, their confessions torn from them with torture. But often, the true evidence the inquisitors sought was not a spell cast, but a page found. The grimoires themselves were diverse in origin. Some were manuals of herbal remedies, others compilations of folklore or astronomy. But once the Inquisition declared them books of the devil, nuance disappeared. A collection of healing recipes became witchcraft. A chart of the stars became a pact with demons. The written word was flattened into one label, forbiddens. And so fires burned in the heart of towns and cities. Alongside accused witches, their books too were consigned to the flames. Pages crumbled into ash, letters turned to smoke. These bonfires were not only punishments, they were warnings, spectacles meant to terrify the living. Knowledge, once bound in parchment, was publicly executed. Yet destruction was never complete. Some books escaped, hidden beneath floorboards, buried in fields, smuggled across borders by those who understood their value. A fragment of a spell might survive, scribbled on the inside cover of a Bible. A recipe for a protective charm could be disguised as a common household note. Secrets adapted, cloaking themselves in the everyday, and in doing so, ensured survival. Inquisitors and priests believed they were stamping out evil, yet their violence only pushed knowledge deeper underground. The more forbidden a book became, the more powerful it seemed. Fear became a lure. A single surviving page, yellowed and brittle, carried with it the weight of entire libraries lost to fire. Each fragment turned into an artifact of resistance. There is a haunting irony in this history. The witch hunts were meant to silence the voices of heresy, to erase alternative wisdoms from the world. But in burning these books, the Inquisition gave them a second life, transforming them into legends. A grimoire destroyed in flames became more than a book. It became a myth, a ghost that lingered in whispers and rumors, far harder to kill than parchment. Villagers would gather scraps of forbidden knowledge, not in libraries, but in memory. Recipes, prayers, and chants were spoken aloud, passed in kitchens, fields, and barns, always with a measure of fear. Mothers whispered protective charms to children, not from pages, but from recollection. What the Inquisition could not see, it could not burn. And so traditions endured, unbound from paper, yet alive in the voice. The persecution was not limited to peasants and outcasts. Even scholars and clerics were caught in the net. Men who studied astrology or alchemy found themselves accused. A pursuit of the stars, or the elements once considered natural philosophy, was recast as heresy. The thirst for understanding the cosmos was branded as collusion with darkness. And every confiscated manuscript was fuel for the pyres. The witch hunts revealed a paradox. The more violently knowledge was suppressed, the more sacred and desirable it became to those who sought it. To hold a grimoire, or even a fragment of one, was to touch something rare, something dangerous, something forbidden by the most powerful authority of the age. Possession became both peril and prestige. The fear that books inspired in authorities was not misplaced. Ideas, once set into words, cannot truly be killed. Even in ashes, they linger. Centuries later, we still hear echoes of the spells and incantations that inquisitors tried to obliterate. In hidden archives, in folklore, in the margins of medieval manuscripts, fragments of forbidden pages resurface, reminders that fire can destroy paper but not memory. And so, through centuries of terror, knowledge survived not in grand libraries, but in whispers, in fragments, in shadows. The grimoires that endured became more than manuals of magic. They became testaments to resilience, to the human refusal to let wisdom die, no matter how many flames were lit against it. They stood at the altars of God, clothed in robes of sanctity, their lips shaping prayers meant to guide souls toward salvation. Yet behind closed doors, some of these same men turned the pages of forbidden books grimoires, inked in secrecy, their words not of heaven, but of earth, fire, and shadow. For centuries, the Church thundered against the dangers of witchcraft and sorcery. Yet history whispers that within monasteries and cathedrals, there were those who quietly broke the very laws they enforced. The paradox is chilling. The same hands that lifted the Eucharist may have also traced sigils in candlelight. The voices that sang hymns by day might have murmured incantations by night. These were not isolated rumors. Court records, letters, and confessions tell us of monks, priests, and even bishops accused, sometimes convicted of dabbling in the forbidden arts. Take, for instance, the story of Johannes Hartleb, a physician in the service of the Bavarian court during the 15th century. Though not a priest himself, he wrote extensively about the Church's fear of grimoires. He claimed that many clerics had access to them and used them in secret, justifying their actions as the pursuit of divine wisdom. Hartleb's writings catalogued spells for summoning angels, demons, and spirits of the dead, spells that he believed some priests studied under the guise of scholarship. But others went further. In 1440, in the French city of Paris, a priest was dragged before the Inquisition for possessing a book of necromancy. Hidden in its pages were instructions for conjuring spirits to reveal hidden treasures. It was not wealth he sought for himself, but wealth to fund the expansion of his parish. He believed that through this dangerous bargain, he could serve God more fully. Yet the Church saw no gray area, only a pact with darkness. He was condemned, his book burned in the square, the smoke rising as both warning and spectacle. Even higher ranks were not immune. In the 17th century, whispers surrounded certain bishops in Italy, men accused of keeping grimoires within their private libraries. These were not ordinary spellbooks. Some were said to contain the Ars Notoria, a text claiming to grant divine knowledge and memory of all things, perfect recall, mastery of philosophy, theology, and the sciences. For ambitious clergymen who desired power in both church and court, such promises were irresistible. To possess the mind of a scholar and the memory of a prophet would make one untouchable. But power is a hungry thing, and it rarely stops where it begins. There are chilling accounts of priests accused not merely of study, but of practice. In the archives of Bologna, Italy, lies the record of a monk who, under interrogation, admitted to invoking demons not to harm, but to heal. He claimed that in desperate cases, when prayer and medicine failed, he turned to secret rites he had found in an old manuscript. His confessions painted a haunting picture: circles drawn in ash, invocations whispered over the sick, promises made to unseen entities. He swore that his only intent was mercy. But mercy delivered through forbidden hands was still heresy. The case raised questions that unsettled even the Inquisition. If the intent was healing, was it still damnable? Was it not, in a twisted sense, an act of service? The answers never came. The monk vanished from the records after sentencing, leaving only fragments of his testimony as echoes of his strange compassion. Perhaps most haunting of all is the legend of the Black Mass, ceremonies where renegade priests were said to invert the rituals of the Church. The Eucharist desecrated, prayers spoken backward, altars turned into stages of blasphemy. Though many such stories were likely exaggerated, meant to terrify the faithful, there are enough consistent details across Europe to suggest that some of these profane rites did indeed take place. And disturbingly, they were not always led by witches or heretics from outside, but by ordained clergy themselves. This duality, saint by day, sorcerer by night, was the ultimate betrayal. It shook the very trust the Church depended on. If even priests could not resist the temptation of forbidden knowledge, what hope did ordinary believers have? And yet, there is another layer to this paradox. It may be that some clergy did not see themselves as sinners at all. To them, the grimoires were not demonic manuals, but hidden extensions of divine truth. After all, the Church's own theology brimmed with mysteries, angels, miracles, the power of sacred words. Was it so far-fetched to believe that God's creation might also hold occult secrets waiting to be unlocked? To study them might have felt not like rebellion, but like devotion. The tension between condemnation and practice stretched for centuries. Theologians denounced grimoires from pulpits, but behind monastery walls, manuscripts continued to circulate in secret. Many were copied by hand, their survival owed not to witches, but to monks. The irony is heavy. The very institution that sought to destroy them may also have preserved them. In this hidden history, we see the shadows of human contradiction. Men sworn to purity who yielded to curiosity. Guardians of faith who longed for forbidden's power. Their stories blur the line between sinner and saint, between blessing and curse. And so the Church's greatest enemy was not always the sorcerer in the forest or the heretic at the stake. Sometimes it was the restless heart of its own clergy, the quiet figure in a darkened chapel, turning the fragile pages of a forbidden book, hoping to glimpse truths the world was never meant to know. Legends have a way of traveling faster than the truth. The whispers of the Black Book did not remain bound within the walls of a monastery or hidden in the hands of a lone scribe. They moved like smoke, carried across borders, reshaped by languages, and adapted by cultures that hungered for an explanation of the unexplainable. By the time the 15th century arrived, what had once been a singular tale had multiplied into dozens of incarnations, each suited to the fears and obsessions of a particular land. In Scandinavia, the legend took on a name of its own, Cyprianus. Unlike the singular, demonic manuscript whispered about in Central Europe, Cyprianus was not a single volume, but a category of books, a tradition of sorcerers' manuals that blurred the line between folklore and forbidden knowledge. The name itself was said to trace back to Saint Cyprian of Antioch, a man who began life as a pagan magician before converting to Christianity. His story made him an ideal bridge between the worlds of the sacred and the profane, and so any book that promised to wield both holy prayers and infernal charms came to be called Cyprianus. Farmers carried copies bound in rough leather, sometimes containing nothing more than herbal remedies mixed with scraps of Latin incantations. Sailors swore by their own editions, filled with charms to quiet storms or summon favorable winds. Yet all versions, no matter how crude or elaborate, carried the shadow of the Black Book's aura. To own a Cyprianus was to walk a dangerous line, The text could heal or protect, but misuse could bring ruin. Stories spread of fishermen dragged beneath the waves for reading its spells incorrectly, or students at theological schools who lost their souls after invoking the wrong page. In the Scandinavian mind, the Black Book had become both tool and curse, an everyday object charged with terrifying possibility. Further east, the tale grew darker still. In the forests and villages of Eastern Europe, the Black Book was bound inseparably with the lore of the vampire. Unlike the romanticized monsters of later centuries, these early vampires were figures of fear and contagion, restless corpses who rose from the grave to feed upon kin and neighbor alike. Priests and peasants alike claimed that rituals written in the Black Book held the power to summon or repel such creatures. Some accounts suggested that entire communities turned to a single wise man or witch who possessed a version of the book, asking for rights to protect livestock, sanctify cemeteries, or even identify which corpse was guilty of rising from the grave. It was not uncommon for these rites to involve the desecration of graves or the driving of stakes through bodies under the moonlight. And always, somewhere in the background, there lingered the idea of a text too dangerous to be read aloud, whose words themselves might stir the dead. For the rural communities of Wallachia, Transylvania, and beyond, the Black Book was more than legend. It was a handbook for survival in a world where the line between the living and the dead was perilously thin. Meanwhile, in Central Europe, the legend fused with academic superstition. Students at universities in Prague, Krakow, and Vienna whispered of a forbidden volume hidden deep within their libraries, available only to those willing to pledge loyalty to darker powers. The book, they claimed, could grant instant mastery of rhetoric, theology, or even mathematics, skills demanded of aspiring scholars. But the catch was clear. Each page read aloud was said to shorten the reader's lifespan. Knowledge, after all, could not be given freely. It had to be paid for in increments of life itself. These rumors thrived in an age when books themselves were precious, often chained to desks in guarded halls. To imagine that one book among them could speak with a voice beyond human authorship was irresistible. Students told of secret societies that exchanged fragments of its text, copying diagrams and prayers under candlelight. And when tragedy struck, when a promising young scholar collapsed unexpectedly or vanished without explanation, the Black Book was whispered to be the culprit. The western reaches of Europe were no less immune to the myth's spread. In the British Isles, the book appeared in tales of witches' grimoires, often referred to as the Black Bible. Here it was said to reverse the words of Scripture, a deliberate inversion of sacred meaning, where the Gospel of John declared, "In the beginning was the Word." The Black Bible twisted it into a declaration of chaos. To read it was to speak in opposition to creation itself, a ritual said to grant witches their power, but bind their souls to the devil. In Scotland, some even claimed the book could only be opened by the left hand, the hand traditionally associated with betrayal, witchcraft, and the sinister. Each retelling across Europe carried the same structure, a book of impossible origin, filled with power both seductive and perilous, guarded by consequence. And yet, the details shifted like a kaleidoscope, refracting local fears into unique patterns. To the seafaring north, it was a charm against storms. To the vampire-haunted east, a tool for survival. To scholars of the Holy Roman Empire, a bargain with mortality. To the witches of the Isles, a pact written in ink as dark as sin itself. This adaptability is what gave the Black Book its endurance. It was never tied to a single culture or creed. Instead, it reflected whatever each society most feared and most desired. And therein lies the secret of its universal appeal. It was not merely a tale about a book. It was a mirror held up to the soul of Europe itself, reflecting the tension between faith and doubt, hope and dread, life and death. The further it spread, the more authentic it seemed. After all, how could a story whispered in so many tongues, across so many borders, not contain some grain of truth. By the close of the medieval era, the Black Book had become not one legend, but a constellation of them, an ever-shifting presence, stitched together by human imagination and fear. And yet, for all its variations, one theme remained constant. The Black Book was never benign. It was never safe. Whether found in the hands of a peasant, a scholar, or a witch, its promise always came with a price. And so the story traveled, carried in whispers, sermons, and fireside tales. A book no one could quite define, yet everyone believed existed somewhere beyond their reach. A book that seemed less written than conjured. A book that belonged, somehow, to all of Europe. They say the Devil's Bible was not only a book, but a living presence. A thing that breathed misfortune into the hands that dared to open it. Its massive pages carried the weight of both scripture and damnation, and those who turned them were never the same again. The final known accounts of its use do not read like history, but like cautionary tales, whispered in monasteries and hidden within folklore. Each is steeped in dread, marked by silence, disappearance, or tragedy, as though the book itself demanded a price for being disturbed. One of the earliest surviving testimonies comes from 17th century Bohemia. A traveling alchemist is said to have gained access to the manuscript while it briefly surfaced in Prague. Neighbors described him as brilliant but erratic, claiming he spoke of conjuring a mirror of eternity, and allowed him to glimpse beyond the veil of human time. Within weeks, he vanished without a trace. His home was left unlocked, the fire still burning in his hearth, meals half-eaten on the table. The only clue was a ring of blackened soot in the center of his study floor, as if something had been burned into existence rather than away. The Devil's Bible soon disappeared from Prague, as if it had followed him into the void. Another account comes from the 18th century, deep in the forests of what is now Slovakia. Villagers claimed their ancestors attempted a ritual written in the darker sections of the manuscript, one promising protection from famine. The ritual demanded an offering of livestock blood, chanted in perfect unison under a lunar eclipse. At first, it seemed to work. Crops flourished, animals bred rapidly, and the village grew rich while nearby communities starved. But prosperity turned sour. Children were born with strange deformities, shadows appeared where no light existed, and several elders claimed to see faceless figures watching from the tree line. Within a generation, the once thriving village was abandoned. Travelers who pass the ruins today still speak of unease, as though the ground itself resists settlement. In Sweden, where the manuscript eventually came to rest, another legend took hold. Records suggest that during the 19th century, a clandestine circle of scholars in Uppsala sought to unlock the cipher of the devil. They met in secrecy, cloaking their gatherings as academic discourse, but in truth, they were performing rituals drawn from the margins of the manuscript, those obscure symbols and half-finished passages ignored by most. One professor, in a surviving diary entry, confessed that each attempt left him plagued by nightmares. He dreamt of colossal figures with hollow faces, leaning over his bed, their silence louder than screams. His final entry is a single line. The book is not read, it reads us. Days later, he drowned in the Firus River, though his body showed no signs of struggle. Even in modern times, whispers persist. During the Second World War, rumors spread that Nazi occultists sought the Codex Gigas, believing it could tilt fate in their favor. Some stories claim it was briefly moved under guard, vanishing into the labyrinth of war-torn Europe. While mainstream historians dismiss these accounts, scattered testimonies suggest the manuscript was indeed consulted in private chambers. A Czech partisan fighter once recalled overhearing German officers speak of a black book of power too dangerous even for them to wield. Whether it was truly the Devil's Bible or another artifact, the association lingers, binding the manuscript to one of history's darkest chapters. And yet, the most unsettling reports are the quietest ones. In hushed tones, Curators and librarians have admitted that strange things happen when the manuscript is handled. Lights flicker. Visitors grow faint. One assistant in the 20th century claimed she heard whispering as she turned its pages, though the hall was empty. Another refused to ever touch the book again, saying she felt her pulse stop for a full moment while holding it. These are not official records, but fragments, the kind of stories institutions prefer to bury under the weight of academic formality. But what cannot be denied is the pattern. Every time the Devil's Bible has surfaced in history, it leaves behind a trail of unease, as though proximity to it corrodes both body and spirit. Villages collapse, scholars drown, alchemists vanish. Even when the book sits locked behind glass, silent and still, it radiates a legend so potent that it blurs the boundary between memory and curse. And this leads to the most chilling possibility of all. Perhaps the book is not cursed because of what is written inside it. Perhaps it is cursed because of what it demands from those who seek it. Power, knowledge, answers to questions that should never be asked. The manuscript becomes a mirror, showing not the devil within its pages, but the one hiding within us. If the stories of the last known rituals are true, then maybe the Devil's Bible has never been fully silenced. Maybe, in quiet rooms where eyes linger too long on forbidden texts, its influence still moves. Not through flames and thunder, but through whispers and choices, through the irresistible pull of a knowledge that promises everything and delivers ruin. And somewhere, locked away in a private collection or sealed in an archive beneath heavy stone, it waits, not lost, not forgotten, simply watching, as it always has, for the next pair of hands foolish enough to turn its pages. Throughout history, mankind has stood before doors it was never meant to open. Some were carved in stone, hidden deep within tombs and temples. Others were written in ink, bound in parchment, passed from hand to trembling hand. And yet, every time, curiosity pushed us forward. It wasn't enough to wonder what lay beyond. We had to see it, touch it, claim it, even when the price was unbearable. The Devil's Bible is not simply a book. It is a mirror, reflecting the one truth humanity can never escape: our hunger for forbidden knowledge. From the moment we could write symbols on clay, we sought not only to record, but to control. Spells, incantations, divine words, all of them promised an advantage over nature, over time, over death itself. And that is the temptation we face even now. If we could reach beyond the limits of life, would we? Legends say the manuscript was written in one night, a pact between man and the devil himself. Whether or not that tale is true almost doesn't matter, because the myth captures something we all recognize, the whisper inside us that asks what we would trade for power. The Devil's Bible becomes more than parchment and ink. It becomes a test. Do you look upon its pages as history or as possibility? The Church once claimed such texts were tools of damnation, gateways that lured men away from salvation. And yet, those same texts were often locked away, not burned. Why? Perhaps even the guardians of morality understood the paradox. To destroy something so dangerous is to erase it, but to preserve it means it might one day be used. For centuries, the Devil's Bible sat in darkness, waiting, not destroyed, not forgotten, waiting. And that waiting is what unsettles us most. Because books do not wait. People wait. Institutions wait. What is it we are saving it for? Curiosity? Research? Or the moment when desperation will force our hand? History shows us this pattern again and again. Forbidden knowledge lies dormant until humanity finds a reason to awaken it. But the truth is harsher. Knowledge itself is not evil. Fire is not evil. Gunpowder is not evil. Electricity is not evil. It is only when man touches them that they burn, destroy, consume. The Devil's Bible is no different. To read it is to claim responsibility. To open it is to declare yourself willing to face the weight of what comes next. Imagine this, a book that may contain prayers to angels beside curses to demons, medical remedies beside rituals of death, visions of heaven beside illustrations of hell. To the believer, it is blasphemy bound in leather. To the scholar, it is history preserved in ink. To the desperate, it is a final chance at salvation or power. Each reader sees not what the book is, but what they themselves bring to it. And that is the true danger. Because in the end, the devil's Bible may not damn us by its words. It damns us by revealing what we already desire. Do we seek wisdom to heal or to control? Do we seek truth or do we seek to dominate it? Every person who dares turn its pages answers that question, whether they admit it or not. And so the manuscript sits in Prague, silent, untouched by most, but never ignored. Visitors stare at it through glass, half in awe, half in fear. Scholars debate its origins, priests condemn its legends, skeptics dismiss its myths. Yet none of that changes one fact. The book is there, and it endures, as though daring the next soul brave enough, or foolish enough, to claim it. But here is the unsettling thought that lingers. What if it isn't just a relic of medieval Europe? What if it is a prototype? A reminder that humanity has always had one hand stretched toward heaven and the other toward the abyss. We build cathedrals and we build weapons. We write scriptures and we write curses. The devil's Bible is not just a manuscript, it is us. It is our dual nature bound in vellum, preserved for eternity. So ask yourself, quietly, honestly, away from the noise of superstition and skepticism. If you stood before it, glass removed, its weight resting in your hands, would you turn the first page? Would you read a single line? Would you let curiosity win? Because that, in the end, is the cost. Not the devil's, not the church's, not the world's, yours. The devil's Bible waits, as it always has, in silence. And perhaps it doesn't matter whether it was written in one night, or over 20 years, by monk or by monster. What matters is the temptation it represents. A temptation older than any book, older than any empire, older even than religion itself. The temptation to know what should never be known. And so, as this story closes, you are left with only one truth. Forbidden's knowledge never truly disappears. It waits in pages, in ruins, in vaults, in whispers passed through centuries. And when the moment comes, it does not ask nations or kings or priests. It asks you, would you dare?